All right, everyone, please welcome back to the show, Mr. Jack McArthur.
What's up, everybody? How's it going, Jackson? I'm really glad to be here.
It's good to have you, Jack. What are things like back in the hometown of Portland?
Going pretty well right now. Getting a job soon. Still applying to jobs. Just been watching a lot of sports, working out, staying busy, man. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. Pretty tired, though, Getting up early in the mornings, having to go to class and all that. So
yeah, man. How's it over there in Idaho?
It's gotten pretty chilly. It's still nice, but the winds made it a little bit chilly, so I'll say that.
Fair, man.
All right, Jack, the first thing I want to dive into, of course, last weekend in the world of college football, we had 5 of the top 11 AP teams go down. Number one, of course, the biggest one was, of course, number 1 Alabama being taken down by Vanderbilt. You also had number 4 Tennessee fall to Arkansas. Number 9 Missouri fell to number 25 Texas A&M. And number 10 Michigan fell to Washington, and number 11 USC fell to Minnesota. Jack, I think the biggest thing here is I was going to ask which of those is the biggest one, but obviously the biggest one is number 1 Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. Even if you're a non-college football fan, just reading that stat line, you would have to say it's Alabama losing. I mean, they have a lot of talent, but that's just an unbelievable upset. So shout out to Vanderbilt for pulling that one off. I would say that another one that shocked me a lot has to be Washington, because entering the season, I didn't think Washington was going to be very good, and the fact that they beat a top 25 team in Michigan, that's big. So that's probably the second biggest upset in my opinion. What do you think, Jackson?
Well, they got the redemption from the national championship back in January.
That is true. The main difference, though, is that Washington, they lost a lot of talent. No Odunze, no Penix, and then for Michigan, obviously McArthur. He's in the NFL now, but he's injured, so it's not really good for him. Obviously, hopefully he'll recover soon. But yeah, no, I definitely think that Washington beating Michigan by 10 is a huge upset.
I think that, of course, I agree with you. The biggest one is Vanderbilt taking down Alabama, and just seeing the scenes from Nashville of everybody taking down the goalposts, walking them down Broadway, and throwing them into the river. But I think the one that's surprised me the least, and I wanted to say this too, was Missouri, because Texas A&M was favored in that game. They were I think they were a 2.5 point favorite just because they were at home. It was the number 9 seed Missouri, but you have to think that wasn't really much of an upset considering the odds makers liked the Aggies in that game, putting them as 2.5 point favorites. The one I think that also surprised me was Minnesota's comeback against USC. That was a pretty big Big Ten game for USC. Obviously, they were coming off the loss against Michigan to open Big Ten conference play. So now they've lost 2 straight, and they're the ones that wanted to leave the Pac-12 for the Big Ten, and so far might be biting at them a little bit.
Yeah, USC, they've done all right this season. What are they, 3-2 right now? I mean, they crushed Utah State earlier this season, and as you mentioned, they lost to Minnesota. Yeah, I think that was kind of a shocker for me, because I mean, USC, they're like a decent team with a lot of recruits every year, but Minnesota, I haven't heard of them being good in a while, so that's a big upset, low-key.
And
another game, you go ahead.
Oh, sorry, you finish.
I was going to say another big game that we should talk about is, I believe it was Miami against Cal. How did they beat Cal by 1? Everybody's saying that Cam Ward should be a Heisman frontrunner up there with Ashton Jeanty and Travis Hunter, and maybe Dylan Gabriel can throw him in the mix if he throws less interceptions against Ohio State this weekend. But yeah, what do you think about that Miami Cal game?
I only watched the second half, and just seeing how big Cal was up, I thought, that game was pretty much over. I thought we were heading towards 6 of the top 11 AP teams going down, but then, Miami just started to come back, and I'm like, oh my God, is Miami going to come back and win this game? And of course, towards the end, a lot of people are going to claim that the ACC helped them out because they had that non-targeting call that many people believe should have been called. To me personally, I didn't see enough for it to be targeting. I think targeting is kind of I don't want to say it's a horrible rule because it promotes safety, but they don't have that in the NFL. I mean, when you think about the differences between college football and the NFL, the way that targeting can eject players in games, and especially if it happens in the second half and they get ejected for the first half of their next game, that's a big rule. So I agreed in the moment that was not targeting because he didn't hit him directly in the head. So, but going off of that, I would say that Cam Ward was electric in the second half. He sparked the Miami comeback and, just winning that game by 1. And I was watching and listening to the broadcast on ESPN, and I was just listening to Reese Davis almost losing his voice from working a 22-hour day, since Cal hosted college game day since 6 a.m. local time, and then something happened with Dave Fleming, who was supposed to be calling that game, but he had a family matter, so Reese Davis had to step in and do play-by-play, and by the second half, you could just hear that he was running out of steam.
Yeah, I wasn't able to watch that game, unfortunately, but just the fact that he had a 22-hour day, that's just unbelievable. That has to be a grind for sure. I mean, for for people like us, we're both going into sportscasting and commentating. But yeah, that's got to be a grind. With commentating, you're always going to be prepared for that next step, like if somebody's sick. But yeah, no, I thought that Cam Ward had a phenomenal performance. He threw for 437 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 pick. I mean, the fact that Miami were trailing 35-18 at the end of the third quarter, that's just crazy. And then they ended up dropping 21 points in the fourth and outscored Cal 21-3 in that fourth quarter. The final score was 39-38. But yeah, I mean, I think that Miami have really surprised me this season. I think that I'm not super fond of Cristobal's coaching style. I think that he's a very good recruiter, but coaching-wise, obviously I don't think he's great, but Cam Ward has really carried this offense.
It's kind of funny you say that because, Cristobal used to coach the Ducks, so of course you have something to say about him. I just think that's kind of funny.
Yeah, I mean, even though I'm a big Ducks guy, you have to be honest, and the reality is that, Cristobal's play calling is not the best. I mean, Miami, all credit to Miami. They're 6-0 this season, 2-0 in conference, 8th in the nation currently, so they very well could make the playoffs, so that's interesting to watch out for, but yeah, that's just my take. But yeah, no, we should talk about some other upsets.
I mean, they are still unbeaten, so right now they still lead the ACC, so they still have a chance to win the conference and get that automatic bid. But I want to kind of transition this. So, of course, we had a lot of the upsets last weekend, which sets up pretty intense games this weekend, and I know that the poll changed a little bit, especially with Alabama going down because of their loss. So Texas goes back to number 1. Of course, they didn't play last week; they had a bye, but they have a big game on Saturday. It's the Red River Showdown. As they play number 19 Oklahoma, who is also coming off a bye, next weekend in Dallas. So that should be a pretty interesting game, and I think Oklahoma has won the majority in the last few years. And another game that I know you're looking forward to, Jack, is number 2 versus number 3 at Autzen. The Ohio State Buckeyes come to Eugene to take on the Ducks.
Yeah, that's going to be a crazy game. I mean, obviously I'm a Ducks fan, so it's hard to not take the Ducks in that game. But if I'm being honest with you, I think that this arguably could be the biggest game in Oregon football history. I know Autzen only can hold, Autzen can only hold 59, 60K people, but standing room only tickets are selling for over $200 to $300. So I don't know what's going on here, but obviously I went to the Michigan State Oregon game. I saw Oregon win that one. I believe it was 31 to 10. That was a great game to watch. Oregon was up 21-0 at the half. I thought they were going to shut them out, and then once they brought in their backups, Oregon's defense collapsed a little bit. And they weren't doing as well in that fourth quarter. But, yeah, I think that this Oregon-Ohio State game is going to be phenomenal. It's going to be a great game to watch. What's your prediction on that game, Jackson? Let's start with you first.
Well, I was going to say this. So I was looking at different lines. Some places have Ohio State minus 4.5. Some places have Ohio State minus 5. I think this is definitely a defining game for Oregon because,
absolutely,
of course, 5 years ago when they went into Columbus and beat Ohio State, that shocked everybody. And now kind of comes the redemption because it was supposed to be a home and home the following year, but then the whole COVID thing happened and shut down the season basically and only allowed for conference play. So now here we are in 2024 finally getting Ohio State coming to Eugene, and the way that Oregon has looked in their first 5 games of the season, I mean, I have to bring up the fact again, they struggled in their first 2 games against the schools from Idaho. They only beat the Vandals by 10. They only beat the Broncos by 3. And then you go to Reeser and absolutely annihilate the Beavs. Then you come back from your bye and totally annihilate UCLA. And then you pretty much whoop Michigan State as well. So you struggle in your first 2 games, but then you start to improve in your next 3. This is a big test with the Buckeyes who, are known for scoring a lot of points. Honestly, I don't know. I think it wouldn't be surprising if Ohio State just boat races Oregon out of their own stadium. I wouldn't be surprised if Oregon turns the tables and just completely shocks everybody and dominates Ohio State against. But not to be biased here, I'm going to take the Buckeyes. I think I want it to be a close game. Of course, I'm not going to watch it because I have Oregon State and Nevada to watch. But I'm going to say that Ohio State wins this game. It's going to be close. I would maybe like it to be an overtime game. Maybe.
Hot take.
But I don't think it's going to be an overtime game. I'm going to take Ohio State. I'm going to say Ohio State wins this game 35-21.
Wow, 35-21. That's a pretty big win, actually. But that's fairly close. It's a 2-score game. I say Oregon wins by 3. Could be 7. Excuse me. Could be 7. I say Oregon wins by 3, though. I think that it's going to come down to that. The fact that Oregon has the home field advantage, it's going to come down to that. When Autzen is packed and loud, it's hard to hear anything. So, in my opinion, I think that it'll be close. The first half will probably be something like Ohio State leads 21-17, and the second half Oregon's going to turn it on. And I said the final score is something like Oregon 38, Ohio State 35. That's my final prediction. But I do think it'll be close. As you mentioned, Ohio State did blow a lot of teams out of the water. This season alone, they're obviously undefeated. They beat Michigan State with the close score to Oregon's game against the Spartans. Oregon beat them 31-10. Ohio State beat them by 31 points, 38-7, and they crushed WMU 56-0. So, I mean, like you mentioned, Oregon struggled at the beginning of the season. So, I think that it's going to come down to Dylan Gabriel's discipline. If he throws 2 interceptions again like he did against Michigan State, it could be a much different game than I'm predicting here. But I say Oregon wins just because their offense is really good, and it's hard to play in Autzen Stadium, man. It's loud.
What are your thoughts on College Game Day going there? 2 back-to-back trips for College Game Day to the West Coast.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be absolutely electric. Obviously, thought about going down this next weekend, but I don't really want to pay $300 for a ticket, so I just decided I'll just probably just watch it with some friends, or my family. But yeah, no, I think it's going to be great. I didn't end up going to College Game Day. I believe it was a year or 2 ago. What was it, like 2 years ago? And they came.
Yeah, I think that
last time they came to Eugene
for the UCLA game, I believe.
Yeah, I didn't go that time.
And then I think last year, didn't they? Was it last year or 2 years ago? They went up to Seattle when Oregon played Washington.
I think last year they went up to Seattle. But yeah, no, I do think that College Game Day is going to influence the crowd a lot. It's going to be like extra booming. I think that's going to be a great atmosphere. But overall, it's going to come down to Oregon's discipline with Gabriel. If he keeps throwing picks, this game could change around.
One thing I have to know is College Game Day has not announced their guest picker yet. But you know who a lot of people want is that if you remember the clip from a long time ago, when College Game Day was in Eugene, they had a little kid, and he was picking between Harvard and Yale that game, and he picked the Yale Bulldogs, and Lee Corso called him a slang term for a little person. And now
I do remember that.
People are looking online, like somebody posted saying that he's now a high school senior, or like he's like developing some app or something. I don't know, or I don't remember the whole thing. But people want Game Day to bring him back as the guest picker, and I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, that would be cool to bring him back for sure.
Although Yale and Harvard are not playing this weekend, I don't believe.
Yeah, I also wouldn't be surprised if they bring somebody like Kenyon Barner or someone like Jonathan Stewart.
I know last time Game Day was in Eugene, they had Sabrina Ionescu as the guest picker, and I know that's right. She probably is not able to come back because the Liberty are in the WNBA finals, so that's probably not an option. Yeah,
shout out to Sabrina Ionescu. She's great.
Liberty are in the WNBA Finals. Series begins on Thursday. Oregon, Ohio State should be a fun one. That one will kick off Saturday at 4:30 on NBC. You can also listen to it on Westwood One. Jack, another game on Saturday in the midday slot that I want to get your thoughts on, like I mentioned before, is the Red River Showdown between Texas and Oklahoma. Of course, that one being played at the Cotton Bowl. It's always fun to see, and I think last year was a overtime game, or that might have been 2 years ago. I don't remember. Time has just flown so much. But what are your thoughts on number 1 Texas and number 19 Oklahoma?
Yeah, it's going to be a huge game. Texas, they're very stacked. I think that Texas is going to crush them. Oklahoma, they've been all right this year, but I just think Texas is too good. Who do you think is going to win that game?
I'm going to stick with the Longhorns. They're the number 1 seed for a reason. They're coming, I guess I should say, I was going to say they were coming off a bye, but so is Oklahoma. I think Texas has to keep their reputation as, the number 1 seed. Of course, now both Texas and Oklahoma being the SEC, that's a big competition because, you still have Alabama and Georgia and LSU. Of course, Alabama and Georgia now each have a loss. So Texas
that's big.
Winning that game against Oklahoma, because I think Oklahoma already has a loss, and I can check that right here if it will allow me. I think, Oklahoma's 4-1, so they've lost already. Texas is 5-0. They definitely need to remain unbeaten to, keep hopes up of an SEC championship and possibly an automatic berth into the playoff. Now, win or lose, I think the SEC is probably going to have the most teams in the playoff by far. So even if Texas loses this game to Oklahoma and goes on to win out, and they end up making the SEC championship and winning, that won't hurt their playoff resume now that it's up to 12 teams. And looking at Oklahoma, that's a good game. That's not a bad loss, unless somehow Oklahoma goes on to lose 3 or 4 more games this season, but I don't see that happening. But Texas definitely, this game won't hurt, especially if it's close, but I think Texas is going to take this one. I think Texas is favored. They are, if I can
look. They should be favored by at least 14.
If I can look at the lines here, I think Texas is favored by a couple touchdowns because, again, Oklahoma has struggled. And we take a look here. Yeah,
Oklahoma just lost to, I think they just lost to Auburn. They just beat Auburn 27-21, and then they lost to Tennessee on September 21st.
Yeah, so Texas is a 14.5-point favorite. So the odds makers are giving them a lot of love. So I'm going to take Texas in this one.
Yeah, I'll take Texas. I was also looking at the preview, and Quinn Ewers should be back. So if Arch Manning is starting for Texas, I still think they win. I just think that if Ewers is back, they win by a lot more. Because Ewers is fun to watch. He's great. I know he's been injured for a minute. But Arch Manning also he's very fast. That dude is unbelievably quick. So It should be a fun game to watch.
I think Texas is going to win. I don't think they're going to cover. I think it's going to be a closer game than 14.5.
I think that they crush them just because Texas's offense is pretty good. So I'd say they beat them by 21. That may be a hot take, but I got Texas up winning by 21.
Well, we'll see. That one kicks off at 12:30 on ABC. And interestingly enough, Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit have that game, which means I don't think Kirk Herbstreit is going to be in Eugene for game day unless somehow they get him the hell out of there right at 9 o'clock and get him to Dallas by, 3:30 local time. But we'll see.
Yeah, I highly doubt that.
Yeah, I don't think Kirk Herbstreit is going to be a part of game day this week just because of the proximity of his game to being on game day. Jack, I want to ask you another question. I want to kind of go back a little bit because I forgot to ask this at the end of the Oregon-Ohio State conversation. Is Oregon and Ohio State, is that a game that we could see again in the Big Ten Championship?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that this season, Oregon, they've been pretty resilient, and despite the fact that they barely beat Idaho State, and they crushed Oregon State, as you mentioned, right? But yeah, I do think that it's going to come down to Ohio State and Oregon. I mean, who do you think is going to be in the Big Ten Championship? Personally, I think it's got to be the Ducks and the Buckeyes.
I think, because the Big Ten got rid of division, so it's just the top two teams that make the Big Ten Championship. Of course, Ohio State and Oregon, both undefeated. Well, only one of those teams will remain undefeated after this weekend. Washington is another team that could surprise people, especially if they beat Oregon at the end of the season because they've won the last 3 games against Oregon. I think Ohio State is going to represent one of the sides in the Big Ten Championship. I so don't want to say it's going to be Oregon, but I think I have to agree with you saying that Ohio State and Oregon is kind of the likely rematch of what we get in the Big Ten Championship. Another team that I could possibly see maybe is Indiana or maybe Iowa, because they've won their games recently, but they just have a tough schedule coming up. So I don't think it's going to be either one of them. So I think Oregon and Ohio State is probably the odds-on favorite matchup in the Big Ten Championship.
Yeah, there's a couple of sleeper teams, as you mentioned.
I don't think Michigan's going to go back there because, like you said earlier, they just lost a lot of their championship roster, so they're not as powerful as they used to be. So I don't think Michigan is going to be there. I think Ohio State is going to boat race Michigan in that final game of the year, make their statement, and move on to the Big Ten Championship. The one that will test Oregon is the game against Washington, because although Washington lost a lot of players, it's the nature of the rivalry. And of course, Washington beat them in the Pac-12 championship game last year. They beat them in the regular season last year. They've won the last 3 straight against them. So, I mean, they've kind of been Oregon's kryptonite. So Oregon's going to have to rise above, beat Washington in order to perhaps have a chance to be in the Big Ten Championship, win or lose this weekend against the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I think that I accidentally said Idaho State. I think I meant to say Idaho.
Yeah, how Oregon, dare you disrespect my Vandals? Don't disrespect my Vandals like that.
That's on me. So
hey, let's talk about the Vandals being nationally televised this week on ESPN2, 7:15 against Montana State.
That's gonna be a fun game. I probably won't watch it.
Me neither. I got Oregon State, Nevada to watch.
Yeah, I can't disrespect the Vandals anymore. But yeah, no, what I was saying is that Oregon, they started off their season slow against Idaho. They've kind of bounced back from there. Obviously, they crushed the Beavers 49-14 by 35 points on September 14th. But funnily enough, Oregon's last regular game of the season, it's actually against Oregon's kryptonite, Washington, November 30th, to be determined on the timing, but it's going to be at Autzen and Eugene. So that should be a fun game to watch. But I do think that it has to be Oregon and Ohio State in the Big Ten Championship, unless it's classic Oregon choke, because arguably the Ducks could have won the Natty last year or at least been in the national championship game, but their defense choked, and that was tough to watch as a Ducks fan. But I do think that Oregon, if they beat Ohio State, they very well could go undefeated this season. But if they lose to Ohio State, I don't see them losing another game this year. What do you think?
Well, I just want to bring this up real quick. So here's Oregon's remaining schedule after this Saturday when they host Ohio State. They will have another Friday night game at Purdue. They should win that one.
Yeah, they should win that one for sure.
Then they host Illinois, who they should beat.
Yeah, I would say they should crush Illinois, especially since it's at home, if I'm not mistaken.
And then is another test. I think they should pass this one too, but they go to the Big House and play Michigan.
That's on my birthday, and it's gonna be a close one. I think that game's gonna be a lot closer than all people envision. I think Oregon should win that game against Michigan, but I'd say Oregon wins that by something like 10 or 14 because Michigan, they've been all right this year, but I just think Oregon on the road against teams like, Washington or Michigan, it's been tough for them. So we'll see.
Then they host Maryland, go to Wisconsin, and host Washington. I think the game that could give them the most trouble is going to Madison because Wisconsin plays tough. And even though they're unranked, they could be ranked at that point. So we'll see how that one looks out. Now, for Ohio State, they should win out because after Oregon, they have Nebraska. Then they go to Penn State. So that's another good game right there, but they should beat the Nittany Lions. Then they host Purdue, go to Northwestern, host Indiana, and host Michigan. So they have a very good chance to win out and be unbeaten going into the Big Ten championship. Win or lose, or if they lose this game to Oregon, they would be a one-loss team in the championship. And if Oregon ends up dropping those any of those games to Washington or Wisconsin, or just loses one, you have a one-loss Ohio State and a one-loss Oregon in the Big Ten championship. Pretty much just a rematch.
Yeah, Ohio State, they have a difficult schedule. They're playing Penn State, who's the fourth-ranked team on November 2nd, and then Purdue. That shouldn't be too hard of a game for the Buckeyes. And then they're playing Michigan to end their season on November 30th, and before that, they're playing number 18 Indiana. So if you look at Ohio State's upcoming games, they're playing against 4 ranked opponents versus Oregon. I believe they're playing against 2. So it should be interesting because Oregon, the toughest teams they're going to be playing this season, obviously this Saturday against the Buckeyes without a doubt, and then they're playing Michigan. Now, I guess Illinois, they're ranked 2, they're 23rd, but yeah, Oregon has three ranked matchups for the regular season, and Buckeyes have 4. So either way, both teams should make the Buckeyes and Ducks should make the playoff easily. But I do think that this Saturday's game is going to be one of the best games all season long for college football.
Another big game on Saturday. I just want to mention it. I don't want to really talk about it because I want to switch gears. Another big game on Saturday is number 12 Ole Miss and number 13 LSU. That one will be at 4:30 on ABC. Now, switching gears, the NHL season starts tonight, and I really want to get to this before we have to be done for the day. The NHL season started in Prague on Friday, but opening night technically tonight with the triple header on ESPN. It starts, and Jack, I want to get your thoughts on this. It starts at 1:30 local time. The Seattle Kraken hosting the St. Louis Blues. They're playing an afternoon game on a Tuesday. That just seems kind of weird.
That is very weird. Most of the time in sports, when you have an opening night, it's either on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, so people can make it or be more likely to make it.
And
but
usually you put
funny to think about.
You put the West Coast games in the later slots.
Yeah, that's odd in my opinion. I think that they should start that game at least at 6 p.m. at the earliest, but that's just my opinion. Who asked me, right? Although, they didn't, obviously. I
have kind of a gap in between classes, pretty much at 1:30. So I'm gonna be pulling up that game on my computer, and while I'm waiting for my next class to begin, I'll just be watching that game. And then later today, at 4:00. Will be the big one. The Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. They will be raising their banner, giving their rings, celebrating the Stanley Cup they won last year as they host the Boston Bruins in a rematch of last year's Eastern Conference semifinal, in which they took in 6 games. Then later tonight, you will have the premiere game for the NHL's technically newest franchise, although they came from Arizona, but the Utah Hockey Club getting their start tonight at home against my Chicago Blackhawks. That one will be at 7:00. Jack, the three games that we have on the national triple header tonight, St. Louis and Seattle, Boston and Florida, Chicago and Utah, which one of those stands out to you the most, or which one are you looking forward to the most?
I would say probably the Bruins and Panthers game, just even though I'm not a big hockey guy, I've immersed myself more into it recently. But the Panthers, hey, they're the reigning champs. I have to watch the raise of the banner. They get their rings. That's going to be fun to watch. And I think that, in my opinion, that would have been very funny and hilarious if they had it, the opening night game to be, to have it be the Panthers against the Oilers, because that would have been a pretty cool, or I guess kind of funny, opening game. But I feel like the Oilers would be super salty about that, because I think they were down 3-0, they made a comeback, and they lost it in Game 7. So if I'm Connor McDavid and the Oilers, I have to have extra vengeance this season. So getting to the prediction soon, I wouldn't be surprised if the Oilers win it all next year. But we should talk about that too. But first, I'll ask, which game are you looking forward to the most, Jackson?
Well, of course, two of my teams playing tonight, Seattle hosting St. Louis and Chicago going to Utah. I'm actually looking forward to all three games because I'm excited to see the Kraken back on home ice. I'm excited to see the Panthers raise their banner and get to play a rematch against Boston. And, of course, I always look forward to seeing my Blackhawks play. If I had to choose one in particular, I would probably choose the nightcap between Chicago and Utah, because not only is it my Blackhawks, but they're taking on the NHL's technically newest franchise after they relocated to Salt Lake City. That should be a fun one, and hopefully Chicago can get a gutsy road win and start 1-0 just like they did last season. I want to now get your way too early predictions for who is going to win the Stanley Cup this year, and then I want to transition to a little bit of the MLB before we get to the top of the hour here, where we have to say so long. Jack, are you sticking with the Oilers to win the Stanley Cup this year?
I got to stick with the Oilers. I mean, the fact that they were in the Stanley Cup and they trailed 3-0 and they made a comeback to make it to Game 7 and they lost, they have to have the most motivation they've ever had in their lives to win. Because if I was on that team, if I was Connor McDavid and I was carrying my team and I was, in the finals, down 3-0, make it to a Game 7 and you lose it, I would be so heartbroken, but also very motivated. So I'll say it'd be the Oilers against the Bruins, and the Oilers will win that series in 6 this season.
All right, I'm gonna hold your word to it. I believe the Stanley Cup champion this year will come out of the Western Conference. The Western Conference, I think, is going to be a lot stronger than the Eastern Conference this year. I'm going to take, I, of course, want to root for my Blackhawks, and of course, I'm repping my sister's Preds, but I think the Stanley Cup champion, they're going to get a redemption shot. It's going to be the Dallas Stars. I think
really
out of the Central Division, they're going to win the Central Division again. They're going to make it all the way to the Stanley Cup, and I'm going to go with a little sleeper team out of the Eastern Conference here, and I'm going to say I don't think any Canadian team will make it to the Stanley Cup final. I'm going to say the Dallas Stars will take care of business against the Pittsburgh Penguins. I think Sidney Crosby is going to lead his team back to the Stanley Cup. They just signed an extension with him. And the Penguins, who did not make the playoffs at all last year, I think they're going to go on a little bit of a run here this year, and they're going to make it to the Stanley Cup final and lose to Dallas. I think that's going to go a full 7 games, though. Should be an interesting series. All right, Jack, just a few minutes left. We got the NLDS and the ALDS going on right now. We have Tigers, Guardians, and Yankees, Royals. We saw those games last night, and tonight we continue with the NLDS with the Dodgers and Padres and the Braves and the Mets and the Phillies. And all 4 of those series are tied at a game apiece. Who do you think is going to come out of the NL and AL to advance to the championship series and the World Series?
I mean, obviously I have the Dodgers. I mean, the Dodgers, that third game today at 6 p.m. is going to be a really entertaining one. So I got Dodgers winning, and then I also got the Phillies. I think the Phillies are too good to lose that game against the Mets. Don't get me wrong. The Mets, they got a lot of talent, but I think the Phillies win, and I think the Dodgers win. What do you think, Jackson?
Out of the NL, I think the NLCS is going to be Dodgers Mets. The Mets have been hot. They won against Milwaukee in the wild card round. After dropping Game 2, they were down in Game 3 too, and then they somehow came back, took the lead, and never gave it up again. So I think the Mets are going to continue with their fire. They're going to advance to the NLCS. They're going to play the Dodgers. And out of the AL, I'm going to stick with the Detroit Tigers. They're also hot. It's going to be Tigers and Royals.
Really?
I'm going to go both upsets in the ALDS.
No
I think the
way.
Royals are going to beat the Yankees and the Tigers are going to beat the Guardians. I'm going Tigers and Royals ALCS, which is going to be much more compelling than Dodgers, Mets, NLCS. But Jack, who do you think is going to get all the way to the World Series? Well, we just have a couple minutes left.
I'm going to say Tigers beat the Guardians. I'll agree with you on that one, but there's no way the Yankees lose to the Royals. Don't get me wrong. The Royals have Bobby Witt Jr. They got some firepower, but Aaron Judge this season has been on a tear. So I say Yankees go to the World Series, okay? So after the Yankees beat the Royals, which you don't think will happen, I think that the Yankees will beat the Tigers, and then after that, it's going to be Yankees, Dodgers, and I'm going to say it's going to be close, but I'm going to say gotta win it. Ohtani's been on a absolute tear also, but I think the Yankees very well could win that, but I say the Dodgers win that series in 6. But it could be. You never know. The Royals could upset people too. So what do you think, Jackson?
I think it's going to be the two furthest teams people think. It's going to be both number 6s. It's going to be the Tigers against the Mets in the World Series. Just because both those teams, it's not, I saw a great tweet, or I'm sorry, a great post on X. It's not the best team who wins the World Series. It's the hottest team. And the Tigers and the Mets have been the hottest teams in their respective conferences. So I think they're going to continue to go on a roll. The Mets are going to beat the Phillies. They're going to beat the Dodgers. Tigers are going to beat the Guardians. They're going to beat the Royals. It's going to be Tigers. It's going to be Mets. The Tigers win the World Series, baby. And the state of Michigan gets 2 out of 5 because we started the year with the Michigan Wolverines winning the college football playoff. We're going to end the year with the Detroit Tigers winning the World Series. And that is going to be a 7-game series down in New York, and the Tigers are going to win that 7th game and celebrate a World Series title.
That may be the hottest take you have ever dropped on a podcast in your tenure of podcasting in your life.
Okay, Jack, I want to get your quick thoughts on this. We have to go here in a few minutes, but I've also seen a lot of posts on X about people kind of hating on Bob Costas because he's not really doing a great job at, announcing the series between the Yankees and the Royals. I don't understand what people's problems they have with him. They make it sound like he's biased. They just don't think he has it anymore. To me, I personally think, he's one of those legends, like Al Michaels, that, it's not really about being excited in the moments. It's just about, telling stories, especially in baseball when you have to fill so much time. I think Costas is doing a great job, but I want to get your thoughts on your opinions on Bob Costas continuing to call the ALDS.
I mean, he's a legend, respectively, and he's one of the best commentators. I honestly think Costas is better than Joe Buck. I heard Costas call a game in a while, but I'm going to definitely watch some baseball tonight. But I would say that he gets too much hate because the Joe Buck hate, I think that's justified because I'm not a big Joe Buck guy myself. But when it comes to Bob Costas...
So you're happy that Joe Davis took over as the voice of the World Series?
Yes, because I can't stand Joe Buck as a baseball announcer.
Or do you say that because Joe Davis is the play-by-play guy for the Dodgers, who you love?
Well, to be fair... I think that Joe Davis is, non-biasedly speaking, I actually think Joe Davis is a pretty good broadcaster. But the reason why I'll say this. The reason why I don't really like Joe Buck is just he's not very entertaining in my opinion. He's a very good football broadcaster. I think he's pretty good. But baseball, I just can't stand him. I'll never forget when I went to a Dodgers game, must have been years ago. I watched Bellinger hit a walk-off, and I listened to the call, right? And Joe Buck's like, Bellinger, the 1-2. Hit into deep left center field, and the Dodgers walk it off. And it's like he needs to have some emotion, man. Like, if you're going to be calling a walk-off, you can't just be like, you know what I mean? You can't just be like that. But I think that Costas is getting too much shade and too much hate thrown at him. What do you think?
Personally, I would take Bob Costas calling the ALCS over Brian Anderson. I mean, I like Anderson. He's a great play-by-play guy. He's fantastic with the NBA on TNT. He's a good basketball announcer. Yeah. I think he should stick to basketball. I mean, baseball is more... For baseball, it's not really about getting emotional, or it's not really about being screaming. Bob Wischusen, he's a great NHL announcer because he gets super excited. With hockey, that's one thing, but with baseball, because just the pace is so different, with baseball, because there's so much time to fill, the great broadcasters in baseball, they tell stories like Al Michaels did when he called the World Series. I personally like Joe Buck because he would bring some stories to the table as well when he was calling it with John Schmaltz, and I think Tim McArthur prior to that. But I personally think Bob Costas is just one of those great legends that, eventually he'll go away, eventually he'll retire because, he's getting up there in age. And, he has the experience too, because most people may not know this. He's the sports anchor on CNN, so he's used to telling stories, and that's what he brings to the table. I just don't understand why he's getting so much flack and hate from the people, the trolls, I should say, on X. And, to me, I want to apologize if I'm offending anyone that may not or that may not agree. I'm just saying, from my perspective, I like Bob Costas as a broadcaster.
That's a fair take. Yeah, he's a pretty good broadcaster.
All right, Jack. Well, we went over the time limit a little bit, but still plenty of time. I want to thank you for agreeing to be back on the podcast. It's not really the Stanley Cup Pod like it was last year, just because we talked about different sports. Of course, we might have to reconnect after the Ohio State-Oregon game just to maybe get your thoughts on how that goes. Of course, go Buckeyes. But of course, you have to remember the two biggest games on Saturday. It's going to be Oregon State, Nevada, and Idaho against Montana. No, I'm just kidding. But those are two big games, though. Oregon, my Beavers taking on the Nevada Wolfpack, and my Vandals taking on Montana State. Both those games nationally televised, by the way. But of course, those aren't going to get as much recognition as Oregon, Ohio State, and Texas, Oklahoma. Jack, thank you very much, and hopefully we beat. Hopefully the Buckeyes beat the Ducks. But thanks for being a guest again.
Okay. Last thing I'll say, hopefully the Ducks win by 3, but I think it'll be a good game regardless. And it's always been, it's always a good time being on the podcast with you, Jackson, and I appreciate you having me on.
All right, Jack. Thank you.